The chandelier light shimmered above us, casting a golden glow across crystal glasses and polished silverware. I watched the light dance through my wine glass, creating tiny rainbows on the pristine white tablecloth of Maison Dorée, one of Los Angeles' most exclusive restaurants. This anniversary dinner was meant to celebrate my son Daniel and his wife Sophia, a perfect evening of toasts and laughter. Instead, it became the night when everything we had carefully constructed fell apart. I should have known better. When Richard, my ex-husband, suggested we all celebrate Daniel and Sophia's second anniversary together, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one I'd carried for 20 years since our divorce. But Daniel had been so excited, his eyes lighting up at the prospect of his father's attention. "Mom, he's making an effort," he'd said. "This could be a fresh start for all of us." Fresh starts. I'd given up on those a long time ago. My name is Madeline Carter. For most of my life, I've been the silent backbone of this family, picking up the pieces Richard left behind when he walked out on our marriage, leaving me to raise our 10-year-old son mostly alone. Richard is a wealthy businessman, thriving on power, charm, and manipulation. The kind of man who measures worth in dollar signs and sees relationships as transactions. "You look lovely tonight, Madeline," Richard said now, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. At 63, he still commanded attention. Salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his custom Armani suit probably worth more than my monthly rent. Time had been kind to him, but I knew what lurked beneath that polished exterior. "Thank you," I replied simply, taking another sip of my wine. Daniel and Sophia sat across from us, young and beautiful in that way that makes your heart ache. Daniel, with Richard's confidence but my eyes. Sophia, gentle and kind, her dark hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. They'd met in graduate school 3 years ago, and I'd thanked God every day since that my son had found someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had, or what his father had. "So," Richard continued, swirling his bourbon, "how's work, Daniel? That investment firm treating you well?" Daniel straightened his shoulders, that familiar, eager-to-impress look washing over his face. "Great, Dad. Actually, I'm being considered for junior partner. At 32? Not bad." Richard nodded, but I caught the slight arch of his eyebrow. Nothing was ever enough for Richard. I watched my son deflate slightly, then rally. "We're also looking at houses in Silver Lake, aren't we, Soph?" Sophia smiled, her hand finding Daniel's on the table. "Yes, we found a beautiful craftsman last weekend. It needs some work, but it has so much potential." "Potential doesn't pay the mortgage," Richard chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. I set my glass down harder than intended. "They're doing wonderfully, Richard. Daniel's firm is growing and Sophia's photography business has doubled its clients this year." The waiter arrived with our appetizers, momentarily easing the tension. Sophia caught my eye across the table and mouthed a silent thank you. I'd always liked her. From the day Daniel brought her home, I recognized something in her, a quiet strength beneath her gentle demeanor. She'd grown up in a middle-class family in Oregon, raised by a single mother who'd taught her the value of hard work and kindness. Values I'd tried to instill in Daniel, despite Richard's influence. Conversation flowed more easily as we ate, reminiscing about Daniel's childhood, discussing local politics, the perpetual drought in California. For a moment, I allowed myself to relax. Maybe this dinner wouldn't be the disaster I'd feared. Then Richard reclined in his chair with that smug confidence I remembered too well. The waiters had just cleared our entree plates, and there was a pregnant pause before dessert. The perfect moment for Richard to strike. With a slow smile, he turned to Sophia. "So," he said smoothly, his voice carrying across the table. "How's the apartment I bought you? Cozy?" Sophia's dessert spoon clattered against the table. Her eyes darted nervously around before settling on Daniel. "What? Apartment?" The air snapped tight. Daniel froze, the muscles in his jaw locking, his eyes wide with panic. I felt my chest constrict, dread crawling up my throat. Then Richard leaned back further, his expression sharpening like a blade. "Then where," he asked slowly, "did the money disappear to?" Gasps rippled from nearby tables. Waiters stood frozen, their trays trembling. And I, sitting there between my son and the man who had once been my husband, knew that everything we had worked to protect, every carefully constructed lie, was about to shatter. Daniel's face drained of color. "Dad, don't dad me," Richard cut him off, his voice dangerously low. "I gave you $300,000 6 months ago. For an apartment for you and your wife. A gift to help you start your lives properly. He turned to Sophia. But you know nothing about this, do you? Sophia looked at Daniel, confusion and hurt washing over her face. Daniel? What is he talking about? I watched my son, my little boy who once believed in superheroes and built forts in our living room, crumble before my eyes. His shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the empty plate in front of him. I was going to tell you, he whispered. I was waiting for the right time. The right time for what? Sophia's voice trembled. The chandelier light suddenly seemed harsh, exposing every flaw, every secret, every lie. I wanted to shield them both, to throw my napkin over that damned light and drag us all back into comfortable darkness. But it was too late. Let me guess, Richard continued, merciless. You thought you could play the big shot, make some clever investments, double the money, impress everyone. Show. Dear old dad that you're not just some middle management nobody. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. How much is left, Daniel? Anything? Daniel's silence was all the answer we needed. I found my voice then, anger burning through my shock. Richard, that's enough. This isn't the place. Oh, I think it's exactly the place, Madeline. You always coddled him, made excuses. This is what happens when you raise a boy to think he deserves everything without earning it. The unfairness of his words stole my breath. I, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to put Daniel through college when Richard's child support checks mysteriously got lost in the mail. I, who had skipped vacations, worn the same clothes for years, saved every penny so Daniel could have opportunities. Sophia stood, suddenly her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Excuse me, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes as she fled toward the restrooms. Sophia, wait, Daniel called after her, then turned back to his father, anger finally breaking through his shame. You didn't have to do this. Not here, not like this. Richard's smile was cold. When you play with the big boys, son, you'd better be prepared to lose like a man. As Daniel rushed after Sophia, I sat there across from Richard, the man I'd once loved, the father of my child, and felt nothing but a deep, aching weariness. The chandelier continued to shine above us, casting its golden light on the ruins of our carefully constructed facade, illuminating a truth I had always feared. Some wounds never heal. They just wait for the perfect moment to bleed again. I found them in the restaurant's courtyard, a small, tasteful garden with a trickling fountain and fairy lights strung between olive trees. Sophia sat on a stone bench, her face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking. Daniel paced in front of her, his gestures growing more desperate as he tried to explain the unexplainable. I was going to surprise you, I heard him say as I approached. Once I made the money back, it was supposed to be for us, for our future. $300,000, Daniel. Sophia looked up, her mascara tracking dark rivers down her cheeks. And you didn't tell me? We've been scrimping and saving for a down payment, eating ramen twice a week, and all this time, her voice broke. I should give you two some space, I said softly. But Sophia shot to her feet. No, Madeline, please stay. She wiped at her eyes. Did you know about this? The question hung between us like smoke. I wanted to lie, to protect my son, but hadn't there been enough deception? I suspected something, I admitted. Daniel has been different lately, distracted, making excuses when you talked about house hunting. I turned to my son, whose face was a mask of misery. But I had no idea about the money, Daniel. How could you? Daniel sank onto the bench, head in his hands. I thought I could fix it before anyone found out. There was this investment opportunity, cryptocurrencies and some tech startup. Travis at work said it was guaranteed to double within months. Nothing is guaranteed, I said softly, thinking of all the lessons I'd tried to teach him over the years. Had any of them stuck? The night air felt cool against my skin as I sat beside him, placing a hand on his back the way I used to when he was small and heartbroken over a lost game or a scraped knee. Those problems had been so much simpler to fix. How much is left? Sophia asked, her voice hollow. Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. Nothing. It all collapsed last month. The silence that followed was deafening. Why didn't you tell me? Sophia finally asked. We're supposed to be partners, Daniel. We promised honesty, above everything else. I thought back to my own marriage to Richard. How many secrets had corroded our foundation before it finally crumbled? How many lies had we told each other in the name of pride or fear? He's his father's son, I said immediately, regretting the words as Daniel flinched beside me. I am nothing like him, he said fiercely, But the doubt in his voice betrayed him. Back inside, Richard was finishing his dessert, looking utterly untroubled by the havoc he'd wreaked. He'd always been like this, dropping emotional bombs and then walking away from the carnage. 22 years ago, he'd told me about his affair over breakfast, then left for a business trip to Tokyo, leaving me to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Daniel took a deep breath, squaring his shoulders. I need to go back in there. Face him. You don't owe him anything, I said quickly. This isn't about him. It's about me. He looked at Sophia, who stood with her arms crossed, still keeping her distance. And us. I need to start taking responsibility. We returned to the table together, a broken little unit. Richard looked up from his phone, arching an eyebrow. Finished with the dramatics? I've ordered coffee. Why did you do that? Daniel asked, his voice steadier than I expected. Why humiliate us in public? Richard pocketed his phone, his expression hardening. You humiliated yourself, son. I merely exposed the truth. That's what business is. Reality, not fantasy. You played with my money I gave you in good faith. I'll pay you back, Daniel said. Every cent. Richard's laugh was sharp. With what? Your middling salary? It would take you decades. Then decades it will be. Daniel's chin lifted slightly, and for a moment I saw myself in him, the resilience I'd had to develop after Richard left. Sophia had been silent since we returned, but now she spoke, her voice quiet yet firm. Did you ever think, Richard, that if Daniel felt he could be honest about his financial situation without judgment, none of this would have happened? Richard blinked, momentarily thrown. This isn't about feelings, it's about $300,000. It's about more than money, she continued. It's about why Daniel felt he needed to impress you so badly that he'd risk everything, including our trust. I felt a surge of pride for this woman my son had married. She saw right through Richard's veneer to the heart of the issue. Richard signaled for the check, clearly ready to end this conversation. Well, it's been enlightening. Next time, perhaps we'll skip the family drama and dine separately. There won't be a next time, I found myself saying. You've done enough damage to this family. His eyes met mine, and for a brief moment, I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Pain? Before his mask slid back into place. Always the protective mother hen, Madeline. But some lessons can't be taught. They have to be experienced. He signed the bill with a flourish. Consider this Daniel's education. In the real world. As Richard stood to leave, he placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. When you're ready to discuss how you're going to fix this mess, call me. Unlike your mother, I don't believe in coddling failure. After he left, the three of us sat in silence. The restaurant had mostly emptied, the waitstaff discreetly cleaning nearby tables, pretending they hadn't witnessed our family. Implosion. I'm so sorry, Daniel finally said, his voice barely audible. He looked at Sophia, then at me. To both of you. I was stupid and selfish, and you were desperate for approval, I said gently. I understand that better than anyone. Sophia reached across the table, taking Daniel's hand. We need to talk, really talk. No more secrets. But not here. As we gathered our things to leave, I noticed Daniel's posture, how defeated he looked under the weight of his mistakes. I remembered him at 10 years old, standing in our driveway, watching Richard's car disappear down the street after yet another missed weekend visit. Why doesn't Dad want to be with us? He'd asked me. I hadn't had a good answer then. I didn't have one now. Outside, the valet brought our cars. Sophia hugged me tightly before they left. We'll figure this out, she whispered. All of us. I watched their taillights disappear into the Los Angeles night, then got into my own car, a reliable Honda I'd driven for 12 years. As I sat there, I couldn't help but reflect on the patterns we passed down through generations, often without realizing it. Richard's need to control through money, my tendency to protect, at all costs. And Daniel caught between us, trying to forge his own path while carrying the weight of both our expectations. The restaurant's sign glowed behind me in my rearview mirror. Maison Dorée, the Golden House. So much pretense, so much illusion. Maybe that was the problem all along. We'd been chasing gold when what we really needed was truth. Tarnished, difficult, but real. I started my car and pulled away from the curb, leaving the golden light behind, driving toward the uncertain darkness that waited ahead of us all. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling of my modest Pasadena bungalow, replaying the disaster at Maison Dorée like a horror film I couldn't shut off. By the time dawn crept through my curtains, my eyes were gritty with exhaustion, but my mind remained sharply painfully alert. The coffee maker gurgled in the kitchen as I wrapped my robe tighter around myself. 22 years in this house. The one asset I'd fought tooth and nail for in the divorce. Richard had been shocked when I insisted on keeping it instead of taking a larger settlement. That place? It's barely worth anything, he'd scoffed. But it was home. The place where I'd raised Daniel, where I'd rebuilt myself after Richard shattered our life. My phone chimed with a text message. Sophia, can I come over? Just me. Need to talk. 40 minutes later, my daughter-in-law sat across from me at my kitchen table, cradling a mug of coffee between her palms. She looked as exhausted as I felt, her usual vibrancy dimmed, dark circles shadowing her eyes. He didn't come home last night, she said quietly. He texted that he was staying at Travis's place, that he needed time to think. She stared into her coffee. I didn't know marriages included time to think away from each other. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. Sometimes we need space to find our way back. Did you? With Richard? The question was honest, without accusation. Considered how to answer, how much truth to offer. No, but our situation was different. Richard didn't want to find his way back. He was already building a new life with someone else. Daniel swears he'll make this right. She sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. But I keep thinking, it's not just about the money, it's about trust, Madeline. He lied to me for months. We ate ramen, noodles, and shopped at discount stores while he was secretly playing investor with his father's money. For what it's worth, I don't think it was about the money for Daniel either, I said carefully. It was about proving himself to Richard. At my expense? There was a flash of anger in her eyes. We're supposed to be partners. I thought back to my own marriage, how quickly Richard's ambition had overshadowed our partnership, how I'd become not a wife but an accessory, a stepping stone to the life he really wanted. You're right to be angry, I told her. And Daniel was wrong. No justification changes that. But if you want to move forward, together or apart, you need to understand why he did it. Sophia's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then back at me. It's him. He wants to come home. Talk things through. And do you want to talk? She nodded slowly. I love him, Madeline, despite everything. But I need to know this won't happen again. That he can be the man I thought I married, not... She trailed off. Not his father, I finished for her. I didn't mean... It's okay. I've spent 20 years trying to ensure Daniel didn't become Richard. I thought I'd succeeded. I gave a bitter laugh. Apparently, some lessons need to be learned the hard way. After Sophia left, I called in sick to the hospital where I still worked 3 days a week as a nursing supervisor. I couldn't face the sympathetic looks, the gentle inquiries from colleagues who'd become friends over decades. News traveled fast in our circles, and Richard's public humiliation of our son would already be making the rounds. Instead, I drove to Silver Lake. I found the craftsman house Sophia had mentioned, a faded beauty on a quiet street lined with jacaranda trees. It needed work, yes, but I could see what had drawn them to it. The wide porch perfect for summer evenings, the beveled glass windows, the sense of history and permanence. I sat in my car across the street imagining a different timeline, one where Daniel and Sophia used Richard's gift as intended, where they were moving into this house, planting gardens, perhaps starting a family, a future now derailed by pride, greed, and secrets. My phone rang. Richard's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer. 22 years of practiced distance made it easy to hit decline. But something, curiosity perhaps, or that lingering need to understand, made me accept the call. Madeline. His voice was crisp, businesslike. No apology, no acknowledgement of the pain he'd caused. What do you want, Richard? I've been thinking about last night. Have you? Shocking. I assumed you'd moved on to your next power play. He sighed, the sound crackling through the connection. Daniel called me this morning. He wants to make arrangements to repay the money. And you're calling me because you've always been his safety net, Madeline. I wanted to make sure you understand. This is between me and my son. Don't interfere. The old anger bubbled up, hot and familiar. Interfere? Like you interfered in their marriage? Their life? You could have confronted Daniel privately, Richard. But no. You had to make a spectacle, had to ensure maximum humiliation. He needed to face consequences. No, you needed to feel powerful. There's a difference. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand, knuckles whitening. You know what amazes me? After all these years, you still don't see it? See what? His impatience was evident. That Daniel's desperation to impress you, his willingness to risk everything, that's on you. You've dangled your approval like a carrot his entire life, always just out of reach. There was a long pause. When Richard spoke again, his voice was different, softer, almost reflective. I didn't call to argue about parenting, Madeline. I called because I'm considering a compromise. What kind of compromise? I'll forgive half the debt if Daniel agrees to come work. For me, the company's expanding and he has potential when properly directed. I laughed, the sound hollow in my car's interior. So that's your game. Use this situation to finally get what you've always wanted. Control over Daniel's career. I'm offering him an opportunity. You're offering him a collar and leash. Another pause, longer this time. Think what you will. The offer stands. He has until the end of the week to decide. After he hung up, I sat staring at the Craftsman house, my thoughts tumultuous. Richard's compromise wasn't surprising. He'd always used money as leverage. What troubled me was the possibility that Daniel might accept, that after everything, the allure of his father's approval might still override his better judgment. My phone buzzed with a text. Daniel, can we talk? I'm at the park near your house. 20 minutes later, I found my son sitting on a bench by the duck pond where I used to bring him as a child. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, his shoulders hunched against an invisible weight. Dad called, he said without preamble as I sat beside him. He offered me a job, said he'd cut the debt in half if I came to work for him. And what did, you say? That I'd think about it. He tossed a pebble into the pond, watching ripples spread across the surface. What choice do I have, Mom? $300,000. I can't pay that back on my current salary. Not without destroying Sophia's life, too. There are always choices, Daniel. He laughed bitterly. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who screwed everything up. The unfairness of his words stung, but I pushed past it. No, I'm just the one who worked 60-hour weeks to put you through college when your father's support checks mysteriously vanished. The one who helped you furnish your first apartment, who co-signed your first car loan. I took a breath. The one who has always been there, picking up the pieces. Daniel flinched as if I'd slapped him. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... I know you didn't. But that's the problem, Daniel. You don't see the cost of things. The real cost. Not just dollars and cents. A family of ducks paddled by. A mother and 5 ducklings in neat formation. We watched them in silence for a moment. Sophia came to see me this morning, I said finally. Is she okay? No, she's hurt, confused, angry. But she loves you. She wants to work through this. I don't deserve her. His voice cracked. Probably not, I agreed, earning a startled look from my son. But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing, every day, through mistakes and failures and disappointments. It's about being brave enough to face the mess you've made and do the hard work of cleaning it up. Like you did after Dad left? I nodded slowly. Like I did. Like you can do now. Daniel was quiet for a long time, watching the ducks, his expression thoughtful. I need to fix this, Mom. But I don't know how to without taking Dad's offer. There's always another way, I said, an idea beginning to form in my mind. But first, you need to decide what matters most. Freedom from your father's control, or the quick fix he's offering. As we sat there on the bench, the autumn sun warm on our faces, I thought about choices and consequences, about the invisible threads that bind families together even when they're broken, about the price we pay for dreams, for pride, for love. And I knew with sudden clarity what I had to do. The storage unit smelled of dust and forgotten things. I hadn't been here in years, not since Daniel left for college and I'd downsized some of our belongings. The metal door groaned as I rolled it up, revealing stacked cardboard boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, the physical remnants of a life I'd moved beyond. What I sought was in the back, a small fireproof safe I'd purchased after the divorce. Inside it were documents, the paper trail of my marriage and its dissolution, carefully, preserved not out of sentimentality but necessity. At home, I spread the contents across my dining room table, our divorce agreement, property settlements, tax returns from those final years together, and a thick manila envelope I'd never shown Daniel. Inside were copies of bank statements, investment reports, handwritten notes, evidence I'd gathered when I first suspected Richard was hiding assets. During our divorce proceedings, my attorney had advised me to let it go. You're getting the house and decent support, she'd said. Fighting Richard Carter and his team of lawyers could drag on for years, drain your resources, put Daniel through hell. I'd relented, choosing peace for my son over justice for myself, but I'd kept the evidence, some instinct warning me it might be needed someday. 22 years later, that day had come. My doorbell rang at precisely 7. Richard stood on my porch, immaculate in a charcoal suit, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. "Madeline?" He nodded, stepping inside when I moved aside. "Your message sounded urgent." "It is." I led him to the dining room where the documents were arranged, a visual testament to our shared history. "Please, sit." Richard glanced at the papers, a flicker of recognition, and something else, wariness, perhaps, crossing his features. "What's all this?" "Memory lane," I said, taking the seat opposite him. "Specifically 2003, the year you decided our marriage had served its purpose and it was time for an upgrade." His mouth tightened. "If you invited me here to rehash ancient history—" "Not ancient history. Relevant history." I pushed a bank statement toward him. "Cayman Islands, an account you conveniently forgot to mention during our divorce proceedings." Richard's face didn't change, but his fingers drummed once, twice against the table. A tell I remembered from our marriage, a sign of his discomfort. "Financial matters from 2 decades ago are hardly $3 million, Richard, hidden away. While you claimed financial hardship, while you fought over every penny of child support." I pushed forward another document. "And here, property in Aspen under your brother's name. The vacation home you purchased 3 months before telling me you wanted a divorce. What exactly are you implying, Madeline?" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." I met his gaze steadily. "You committed fraud during our divorce proceedings. You hid assets. You lied under oath." Richard leaned back, his expression hardening. "That would be very difficult to prove after all this time." "Perhaps, but I'm willing to try. I've scheduled a consultation with Patricia Liang." I watched with satisfaction as recognition dawned on his face. Patricia was one of LA's most formidable divorce attorneys, known for her ruthlessness in pursuing hidden assets. "She thinks there's more than enough here to reopen our settlement." This is absurd. Even if there were any truth to these accusations, which I categorically deny, the statute of limitations. Fraud has no statute of limitations in California when it comes to divorce settlements. You know that, being such a savvy businessman. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Richard's face. "What do you want, Madeline?" I took a deep breath. This moment, this was what I'd prepared for, what I'd steeled myself to do. "I want you to forgive Daniel's debt. Completely. No strings, no job offers, no control." Richard laughed, but it sounded forced. "So this is blackmail." "I prefer to think of it as negotiation. Your specialty, if I recall." He stood abruptly, pacing the length of my dining room. "You've kept this information for 22 years, never used it, and now, suddenly, I kept it because I knew who you were, who you are. I knew someday you might come after our son the way you came after me." I remained seated, maintaining the calm I'd practiced. "I chose not to use it then, because I wanted peace for Daniel. I'm choosing to use it now for the same reason." "You can't possibly think you'd win. My lawyers—" "It's not about winning, Richard. It's about exposure." I let that sink in. How would it look? Prominent businessman Richard Carter, fraudulently concealing millions during his divorce? The IRS might have questions too. And your investors. Your board. Richard stopped pacing, his back to me, shoulders rigid beneath his expensive suit. For a long moment, he was silent. When he turned, his expression had changed. Not angry now, but calculating, reassessing. "You always were smarter than people gave you credit for," he said finally, a hint of reluctant admiration in his voice. "Including me." "I know." He returned to the table, looking at the evidence I'd preserved for over 2 decades. "If, and this is purely hypothetical, if I were to forgive Daniel's debt, what happens to all this?" He gestured at the papers. "It goes back in the safe, unless you give me reason to bring it out again. And that's it? No other demands?" His skepticism was evident. "Just one more." I leaned forward. "I want you to stop using money as a weapon against our son. Stop dangling your approval just out of reach. If you want a relationship with Daniel, build one based on something real, not manipulation and control." Richard studied me, his expression unreadable. "You realize this changes nothing between us." "I don't want anything to change between us, Richard. I made peace with who you are a long time ago." After a moment, he nodded. I'll have the debt forgiveness drawn up tomorrow. No strings attached. Thank you. As I walked him to the door, Richard paused, looking around my modest home with new eyes. You could have taken me for millions, Madeline. Had the life you deserved. I have exactly the life I deserve, I told him. One I built myself. That's something you never understood about me. After Richard left, I gathered the documents, returning them to the safe. I wasn't naive enough to believe our confrontation would fundamentally change him. People like Richard rarely transform overnight, but I'd seen something in his eyes. A flicker of recognition, perhaps respect. It wouldn't last, but it was enough for now. I called Daniel, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me. Your father might be reaching out soon. About the money. What? Why? Did something happen? Let's just say we had a conversation about family, about choices, about the past. I chose my words carefully. Daniel, when he contacts you, listen to what he has to say. But remember, you don't owe him anything. Not gratitude, not loyalty, not your future. Mom, what did you do? Suspicion colored his voice. What mothers have done since the beginning of time, I said simply. Protected my child. After we hung up, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. 22 years ago, I'd been a woman shattered by betrayal, terrified of the future, desperate to shield my son from the fallout of his father's selfishness. Tonight, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph exactly, but vindication. The power of having finally used the truth as my own weapon, after decades of silence. Some battles, I realized, aren't about winning. They're about choosing the right moment to fight. The following morning dawned crisp and clear. One of those perfect California autumn days that make you forget how brutal summer had been. I was watering my front garden when Daniel's car pulled into my driveway, tires screeching slightly as he braked too hard, a habit from his teenage years that had apparently never faded. He was out of the car before I could set down my watering can, his expression a mixture of confusion and something else. Hope, perhaps. Dad called, he said without preamble. He's forgiving the debt. All of it. No conditions, no strings. He ran a hand through his hair, disheveled as if he'd been tugging at it. Mom, what did you say to him? What happened? I turned off the hose, buying time to choose my words carefully. Let's sit, I suggested, gesturing toward the porch swing. Once settled, I studied my son's face. The face I'd watched change from round-cheeked infant to serious little boy to the man before me now. In his features, I saw echoes of both Richard and myself, nature's reminder that no matter how bitter the divorce, we would always be linked through this person we'd created together. Your father and I came to an understanding, I said finally, about the past and about what family really means. Daniel's brow furrowed. That doesn't sound like Dad. People can surprise you. Though, in truth, Richard hadn't surprised me at all. He'd simply responded to leverage the way he always did, with pragmatic self-preservation. He said something else, too. Daniel's voice grew quieter. He said I should thank you, that you'd fought for me like a lioness. Those were his exact words. His eyes searched my face. What did you do, Mom? I considered lying, crafting some vague explanation that would satisfy his curiosity without revealing the full truth. But hadn't there been enough deception in our family? I reminded your father of his own past mistakes, I said carefully. Mistakes that could have consequences even now, if brought to light. Daniel's eyes widened. You blackmailed him? I prefer negotiated from a position of strength. I offered a small smile. For a moment, Daniel was silent, processing. Then, to my surprise, he began to laugh, a genuine, almost cathartic sound I hadn't heard from him in weeks. My mom, the secret badass, he said, shaking his head. All these years, I thought you just accepted everything he did. Walked away with nothing. I walked away with you, I reminded him. And my dignity. Those weren't nothing. I paused, then added, but yes, I also walked away with insurance, just in case. Does this mean I'm off the hook? Just like that? His laugh faded, replaced by a more somber expression. It doesn't feel right. I should face consequences for what I did. Oh, you will, I assured him. Your father may have forgiven the financial debt, but you still have a significant one to Sophia. And to yourself. Daniel nodded slowly. She's barely speaking to me. Says she needs time to process everything. He looked down at his hands. I don't blame her. I lied to her for months, made financial decisions that affected both of us without consulting her. I broke her trust. Trust can be rebuilt, I said. But it takes time and consistent effort. How did you do it? He asked suddenly. After Dad left. How did you start over? The question caught me off guard. Daniel rarely asked about that period directly. It had always seemed a tacit agreement between us to look forward, not back. One day at a time, I said honestly. Some days I could barely get out of bed. Other days I felt almost free, relieved that the pretending was over. I reached for his hand. But mostly, I focused on you, on making sure you had stability, that you knew you were loved unconditionally, even if your father's love seemed to come with caveats. I wish I'd understood sooner what that cost you. We all have our blind spots, especially when it comes to family. I squeezed his hand. The question is what you do once you can see clearly. I want to make things right with Sophia, he said firmly. I've been offered a better position at the firm, more responsibility, better pay. It's not enough to buy the house we wanted. Anytime soon, but it's a start. That's good, I said, genuinely pleased. But remember, this isn't just about money. I know. He met my gaze. It's about honesty, trust, the things that actually matter. He paused. The things you tried to teach me, that somehow got drowned out by Dad's voice in my head. We sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, gently rocking on the swing as the morning sun climbed higher. A neighbor walked by with her dog, waving cheerfully, unaware of the seismic shifts occurring in our family's foundation. There's something else, Daniel said finally. Dad wants to have dinner again. Just him and me this time. I tensed involuntarily. And do you want that? I don't know. He stared out at the street, his profile thoughtful. Part of me wants to tell him to go to hell, but another part still craves his approval. I finished for him. Is that pathetic? After everything? It's human, I said gently. He's your father. That connection. It's primal, Daniel. But recognizing its power over you is the first step toward not being controlled by it. I think I need to see him, he said after a moment, to say some things I've never had the courage to say. Not for his benefit, but for mine. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of pride and concern. Just remember who you are. Not who he wants you to be, not who you think you should be. Just you, the man your wife fell in love with, the son I've always been proud of, regardless of mistakes. Daniel leaned over, hugging me awkwardly but earnestly on the porch swing. Thanks, Mom, for everything, including whatever mysterious leverage you held over Dad all these years. I smiled against his shoulder. Some secrets a mother is entitled to keep. After Daniel left, I called Sophia. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. How are you holding up? I asked. Taking it day by day, she replied. Daniel told me about the debt being forgiven. That's unexpected. Richard occasionally does the right thing when properly motivated. There was a pause, then, Daniel says you had something to do with that you went to bat for him. I simply had a conversation with Richard about family obligations. Must have been some conversation. I could hear the faint smile in her voice. Sophia, I said carefully, I know it's not my place to give advice about your marriage, but for what it's worth, Daniel made a terrible mistake, but not because he doesn't love you, because he spent his life trying to earn his father's love, and sometimes that quest blinds us to the real love right in front of us. I know, she said quietly. That's what makes this so hard. I understand why he did it. I just don't know if understanding is enough. Only you can decide that, but don't decide too quickly. Some things are worth fighting for even when they're broken. After we hung up, I wandered through my house, touching familiar objects. The bookshelf Daniel had helped me build in high school, the quilt my mother had made before she died, the framed photograph of Daniel's college graduation where he stood beaming between Richard and me, unaware of the tension vibrating between his parents. So many moments captured, so many left uncaptured. The night I'd sat on my bathroom floor after Richard left, wondering how I would survive. The afternoon Daniel had crashed his bike and I'd bandaged his knee, telling him stories to distract him from the pain. The day Richard had missed Daniel's championship baseball game because a business meeting ran long, and the look of devastation on our son's face that slowly hardened into practiced indifference. We build our lives on these moments, I thought. They become our foundation, for better or worse. And sometimes it takes an earthquake to show us which parts of that foundation are solid and which were built on sand. 3 days later, I found myself back at Maison Dorée, this time alone, sitting at the bar nursing a glass of Cabernet. The restaurant looked different from this angle, softer, less intimidating. From here, I could see the entire dining room, including the table where our family drama had unfolded just a week earlier. I hadn't planned to come here. I'd been driving home from a shift at the hospital, mentally exhausted after a day of administrative emergencies and staff shortages. But as I passed the restaurant's discreet sign, something pulled me in. A need to face the scene of our public humiliation, perhaps. Or simply curiosity about how it would feel to be there without the weight of family tension. Mrs. Carter? I turned to find a man in his 50s watching me with friendly recognition. His silver hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and his tailored, suit marked him as management rather than waitstaff. It's Ms. Martin now, I corrected automatically. I'd reverted to my maiden name after the divorce, a small but significant reclamation of identity. Have we met? Marco Alvarez, general manager. He extended his hand. I was here last week during your family dinner. His expression conveyed diplomatic understanding. I wanted to check that. You were comfortable. It's unusual to see guests return so soon after such an experience. I'm fine, I assured him, oddly touched by his concern. Just needed a quiet drink after a long day. He nodded, then hesitated. I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I wanted to say, your son returned yesterday, to settle the bill. The bill? I thought Richard took care of that. Marco's eyes crinkled. Slightly. Apparently, your son felt differently. He insisted on paying, apologized for the disturbance, and left generous gratuities for the staff who witnessed the scene. He paused. It was a gesture of integrity. Not many would bother. Warmth spread through my chest. Pride. And something like vindication. That sounds like the man I raised him to be. He mentioned you might come by at some point. Asked me to give you this. Marco produced a small envelope from his jacket pocket. Enjoy your evening, Ms. Martin. After he left, I stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note in Daniel's familiar scrawl. Mom, if you're reading this, you're as stubborn as I am, facing the scene of the crime instead of avoiding it. I came back to clean up my, mess. Literally, I paid the bill Dad left. Some things we have to fix ourselves, right? Had dinner with Dad last night. Finally said all the things I've wanted to say for years. It wasn't pretty, but it was necessary. I don't know if anything will change between us, but I feel different. Lighter somehow. Sophia and I are talking, really talking. She's agreed to counseling. It's a start. Thank you. For being the parent who stayed, who taught me by example rather than lectures, who loved me even when I didn't deserve it. I'm trying to be worthy of that love. Love you, Daniel. I folded the note carefully, slipping it into my purse as I blinked back unexpected tears. Around me, the restaurant hummed with activity, waiters gliding between tables, the soft clink of silverware, murmured, conversations punctuated by occasional laughter. Life continuing as it always does, even after moments that feel like endings. My phone vibrated. A text from Sophia. Dinner tomorrow night? Just us girls. I could use some Madeline wisdom. I smiled, typing back, I'll bring wine. And wisdom is a strong word for what I have to offer. Her response came quickly. You underestimate yourself. Always have. See you at 7. As I finished my wine, I reflected on the strange turns life takes. A week ago, I'd sat in this restaurant watching my family implode, feeling powerless to stop the destruction. Now, somehow, from those ashes, something new seemed to be emerging. Not perfect, not healed, but possible. My reverie was interrupted by a familiar voice that sent ice water through my veins. Of all the gin, joints in all the towns in all the world. Richard slid onto the bar stool beside me, immaculate as always in what appeared to be a fresh-from-the-office suit. He signaled the bartender with a subtle gesture that spoke of frequency and familiarity. You're stalking me now? I asked, not entirely joking. Hardly. Tuesday night martini. It's tradition. He accepted his drink from the bartender with a nod. Though I usually sit in the back corner, saw you here and thought it would be rude not to say hello. Since when do you care about rudeness? His lips twitched. Fair point. We sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a moment. The familiar awkwardness of ex-spouses who once shared everything and now shared nothing but history and a child. Daniel came to see me, Richard said finally. Had quite a lot to say. So I heard. Did you put him up to it? There was no accusation in his tone, just curiosity. Give me some credit, Richard. Daniel's a grown man capable of making his own decisions. He sipped his martini. He said some things that were difficult to hear. Truth often is. Richard turned to face me fully, his expression more serious than I expected. Was I really Such a terrible father, Madeline. The question caught me off guard. Not just the words, but the genuine uncertainty behind them. In 22 years, I'd never heard Richard express doubt about his parenting. You weren't terrible, I said carefully. You were inconsistent. Present when it suited you, absent when it didn't. Generous with money, stingy with time and attention. I met his gaze. You loved the idea of being Daniel's father more than the reality of it. He flinched slightly, then nodded. He said something similar, less diplomatically. He's had years to perfect that speech. Apparently. Richard swirled the olive in his martini. He also said you never spoke ill of me, even when I deserved it. I shrugged. That wasn't for your benefit. It was for his. I know. He set down his glass. That's what makes it remarkable. You had every right to poison him against me, and you didn't. Children shouldn't have to carry their parents' baggage, Richard. They have enough of their own to deal with. He studied me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. You've changed, Madeline. Or perhaps you were always this wise and I was too self-absorbed to notice. Both. Probably. The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. Sophia called me today. Asked if I would consider funding a small photography studio for her. As a loan, not a gift. She was very specific about that. And I said yes. With proper paperwork, reasonable interest, everything above board. He paused. She has talent. And backbone. I respect both. She'll pay you back. Every penny. I know she will. Richard finished his drink. Daniel's lucky to have her. Luckier than he deserves, maybe. On that, we agree. I gathered my purse, ready to leave. This unexpected detente had lasted longer than I would have predicted, but I didn't want to push my luck. Richard reached out, his hand hovering near my arm without quite touching it. Before you go, Daniel mentioned they're looking at a house in Silver Lake. Craftsman style needs work. I nodded, uncertain where he was going with this. I'd like to help, not buy it for them, he added quickly, seeing my expression, but assist with the down payment, as a proper loan, documented and everything. Through a bank, not directly from me. Why? I couldn't keep the suspicion from my voice. Richard sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. Because I'm trying to do better, Madeline. Late, I know. Perhaps too late, but I'd like to try. As I stood to leave, I felt an unexpected wave of compassion for this man who had once been the center of my world, then the architect of its destruction. It's never too late to be a better father, Richard. Just remember, real love doesn't come with strings. I'm learning that, he said, quietly, slowly. Outside, the Los Angeles night wrapped around me like a familiar blanket, warm, slightly smoggy, pulsing with distant traffic and possibilities. I drove home through streets I'd navigated for decades, past landmarks that had witnessed my journey from young bride to single mother to the woman I was now, stronger, wiser, no longer defined by what I'd lost, but by what I'd built from the ruins. Tomorrow, I would have dinner with Sophia, offer what comfort and counsel I could. Next week, I'd help Daniel move the last of his things from their apartment to the small house they'd rented while figuring out their next steps. Life would continue, imperfect and messy and real. And for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected unfurling in my chest. Not just resignation or determination, but hope. Fragile, cautious hope that from the wreckage of that disastrous dinner, something better might be emerging, for all of us. 6 months passed, seasons turning with gentle persistence. Winter in Los Angeles, such as it was, gave way to spring, bringing jacaranda blooms and new beginnings. I found myself standing on the porch of a familiar craftsman house in Silver Lake. Paint, samples in one hand, coffee in the other. The sage green or the slate blue? Sophia asked, coming up beside me. She'd cut her hair since the disaster at Maison Dorée, a chin-length bob that suited her quiet confidence. For the exterior. Daniel likes the blue, but I'm leaning toward green. Green, I said decisively. It'll pop against the wood trim, especially once it's restored. She nodded, making a note on her phone. That's what I thought, too. The house had finally become theirs 3 weeks ago. A miracle of timing, compromise, and yes, Richard's help, though not in the way any of us had expected. True to his word, he'd arranged a proper bank loan with reasonable terms, acting as co-signer rather than benefactor. Daniel had initially balked at accepting even this much assistance. But Sophia had been pragmatic. It's a legitimate business arrangement, she'd told him, And if it helps us get our dream home while he rebuilds his relationship with you, that's a win-win. Inside, Daniel was carefully removing decades-old wallpaper in what would become their dining room, his movements methodical and patient. So different from the impulsive young man who'd gambled away his future just 6 months earlier. "Mom, perfect timing," he called when he spotted me. "We found something you should see." He led us to a section of wall where the wallpaper had already been stripped away. There, etched into the plaster, were names and dates, former inhabitants marking their presence across decades. The earliest date was 1924, the most recent 2015. "We're thinking of preserving it," Sophia explained, "adding our names when the renovation is complete, becoming part of the house's story." I traced the faded etchings with my fingertip, oddly moved by this tangible connection to the past, to people who had made this house a home, faced their own struggles and joys within these walls, then moved on, leaving their mark behind. "It's perfect," I said. "Like a family tree for the house itself." Daniel wrapped an arm around Sophia's shoulders. "That's what we thought. Speaking of family," he glanced at his wife, who nodded encouragingly. "We wanted to talk to you about something." We moved to the back porch, where mismatched lawn chairs offered a view of the overgrown but promising backyard. Wind chimes from the neighbor's garden sang softly in the breeze. "We've been thinking about the future," Daniel began, uncharacteristically hesitant, "about what kind of parents we want to be." My heart skipped a beat. "Are you—" Sophia laughed, shaking her head. "No, not yet, but we're talking about it. Seriously talking. And we realized," Daniel continued, "that we have an incredible model for parenthood right in front of us." He reached for my hand. "You, Mom." Emotion tightened my throat. "I made plenty of mistakes, Daniel. But you stayed," he said simply. "Through everything. You put me first, even when it cost you. You showed me what unconditional love looks like, even when I was too blind to see it. And you never tried to buy his love or loyalty," Sophia added. "You earned it the hard way." I blinked back tears, overwhelmed by their words. For so many years I'd second-guessed my parenting decisions, wondered if I'd done enough, been enough, to hear my son, now an adult, eyes finally open to the complexities of family, affirm my choices was a gift I hadn't known I needed. "There's something else," Daniel said. "Dad's coming for dinner next weekend. Just a casual thing to see the house." I raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me this because we'd like you to come too," Sophia said. "If you're comfortable with that." My initial instinct was to refuse. Richard and I had reached a tentative truce, but social gatherings seemed a step too far. Yet something in their expressions, hope, perhaps, or a desire for healing that extended beyond themselves, gave me pause. "I'll think about it," I promised. Later, walking through the neighborhood, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey of the past 6 months. The humiliation at Maison Dorée had seemed like an ending, a final destruction of what little family cohesion remained. Instead, it had become a catalyst, forcing truths into the open, compelling each of us to face our own roles in the dysfunction that had defined us for too long. Daniel and Sophia had emerged stronger, their relationship tested but ultimately deepened by crisis. They'd attended counseling faithfully, learning to communicate honestly about everything from finances to feelings. The process hadn't been smooth. There had been arguments, tears, moments when reconciliation seemed impossible. But they'd persevered, committed to building something authentic from the ruins of deception. Richard, too, had changed, though in subtler ways. He'd kept his distance initially, giving Daniel space to heal and rebuild. But gradually, carefully, he'd begun reaching out, not with grand gestures or financial solutions, but with small, consistent efforts. Coffee meetings, phone calls that didn't center on business or achievements, questions about Daniel's life that stemmed from genuine interest rather than judgment. And I had changed as well. The confrontation with Richard, using leverage I'd held for decades, had awakened something dormant within me. Not power over others, but power within myself. The recognition that I was stronger than I'd believed, that the quiet dignity I'd maintained through years of struggle wasn't weakness, but a different kind of strength. My phone chimed with a text from an unexpected source. "Dinner tonight? Just the two of us. There are some things I'd like to discuss. Richard." I stared at the message, conflicted. We'd established a cautious civility in recent months, occasionally communicating about Daniel and Sophia, but always maintaining careful distance. A private dinner implied a level of reconciliation or at least conversation, I wasn't sure I was ready for. Yet curiosity tugged at me. What could Richard possibly want to discuss that required face-to-face interaction? And hadn't I just been contemplating the transformative power of difficult truths? La Bistro at 7? I texted back before I could overthink it. His response came quickly. Perfect. Thank you, Madeline. As I walked back toward the Craftsman house, now buzzing with activity as Daniel and Sophia's friends arrived to help with renovation, I felt an odd sense of completion. Not an ending, exactly, but the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another. The wounds of the past hadn't disappeared. They had scarred over, becoming part of the landscape rather than defining it. And from that altered terrain, something new was emerging. Not perfect, not unblemished, but authentic. Real. I thought of the names etched into the dining room wall, generations leaving their mark on a house that had sheltered them through their own stories of love and loss, triumph and failure, each contributing to the foundation, making it stronger for those who would come after. Perhaps that's all any of us can hope for in the end, to leave behind foundations sturdy, enough for the next generation to build upon, rather than have to start again from rubble. La Bistro was Richard's kind of restaurant, upscale but understated, where wealth whispered rather than shouted. He was already seated when I arrived, rising with old-fashioned courtesy as the maitre d' led me to the table. "You look well, Madeline," he said, and I was surprised to detect genuine warmth in his voice. "Thank you." I settled into my chair, curious and wary in equal measure. "This is unexpected. I appreciate you coming." Richard seemed uncharacteristically nervous, his fingers tapping lightly against the stem of his water glass. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. About family. About legacy." The waiter appeared, saving me from having to respond immediately. We ordered, Richard his usual steak, me the sea bass, and fell into strangely comfortable small talk about Daniel and Sophia's house, the spring weather, mutual acquaintances we'd managed to maintain through decades of separation. It wasn't until our entrees arrived that Richard finally broached whatever had prompted this meeting. "I've been seeing someone," he said, cutting precisely into his steak. "A therapist." I nearly choked on my wine. "You? Therapy?" A wry smile touched his lips. "Try not to look so shocked. It's not entirely unheard of for men of my generation to seek help. It is for men like you," I countered. "Men who believe vulnerability is weakness. Perhaps that's exactly why I needed it." He set down his knife and fork, meeting my gaze directly. After you confronted me, I found myself unsettled. Questions I'd never allowed myself to ask started surfacing. About why I'd made the choices I had. About what I truly valued. I listened, skepticism warring with curiosity. Richard had always been a consummate performer, crafting whatever persona served his interests in the moment. Yet something in his manner seemed different. A new humility. Perhaps, or simply the fatigue of maintaining facades for too long. "I've done a lot of damage," he continued. "To Daniel. To you. Even to myself, though I'm only beginning to understand how." "Why are you telling me this, Richard?" He took a deep breath. "Because I owe you an apology, Madeline. A real one, not the kind I've offered over the years when it was expedient." His voice grew quieter. "I'm sorry for the ways I hurt you during our marriage, for the affairs, the lies, the manipulation, for using money as a weapon in our divorce, for hiding assets that were rightfully half yours, for abandoning my responsibilities as a father and leaving you to shoulder that burden alone." The restaurant continued to hum around us, waiters gliding between tables, glasses clinking, conversations flowing. Yet for me, time seemed suspended, the moment crystallizing into something I'd never expected to experience. Richard Carter, genuinely remorseful. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added when I remained silent. "I wouldn't, in your position. But I wanted you to know that I recognize what I did. That I'm trying, however belatedly, to become a person worthy of the family I've taken for granted." I studied him, the face I'd once loved, then hated, then gradually become indifferent to. The lines around his eyes had deepened, his hair more silver than pepper now. Time had softened his edges. Or perhaps it was something else. The humbling force of facing one's own failings. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "It matters. More than I would have expected." He nodded, returning to his meal with visible relief. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. "There's something else." From his jacket pocket, he withdrew an envelope, placing it on the table between us. "I've amended my will. Daniel will inherit the bulk of my estate, of course, but I've set aside a portion for you. I shook my head immediately. I don't want your money. Richard. It's not about want, Madeline. It's about what's right. He pushed the envelope closer. This is a summary of what would have been rightfully yours had I been honest during our divorce. With interest. I made no move to take it. Why now? After all these years? Because I'm trying to right old wrongs before it's too late. A shadow passed across his features. My father died bitter and alone, estranged from everyone who might have cared for him. I'm starting to understand why. I thought of the man I'd married. Ambitious, charismatic, certain that wealth and status were the measures of a successful life. The man before me now seemed different, humbled by time and reflection, finally recognizing the cost of priorities misplaced. I don't need your money, I said again, but gently, this time. But I appreciate what it represents. As we finished our meal, conversation shifted to lighter topics. Daniel and Sophia's renovation progress, my recent promotion at the hospital, a planned trip to visit my sister in Oregon. Normal, civilized exchange between two people connected by history, and a son they both loved. When the check arrived, I reached for it, but Richard's hand covered mine, not possessively, but with unexpected gentleness. Please, he said, allow me this small gesture. Outside the restaurant, the evening had cooled, stars emerging in the clear spring sky. Richard walked me to my car, maintaining a respectful distance. Will you come to dinner next weekend? He asked. At Daniel and Sophia's? I hesitated, then nodded. Yes, I think I will. I'm glad. He smiled, a real smile, without the calculation I was accustomed to seeing. Good night, Madeline. As I drove home, I found myself thinking about chandeliers, how they transform light, scattering it into countless sparkling points. The chandelier at Maison Dorée had witnessed our family's most painful moment, illuminating truths we'd all tried to hide. But perhaps that illumination, however harsh, had been necessary, revealing not just our flaws and fractures, but the possibility of restoration. The following weekend, I stood on Daniel and Sophia's porch, a bottle of wine in one hand, a small housewarming gift in the other. Through the window, I could see them moving about their kitchen, laughing together as they prepared dinner. Richard was already there, setting the table with careful precision, looking more at ease than I'd seen him in years. Daniel spotted me first, his face brightening as he came to open the door. Mom, come in. We're just about ready. The house smelled of garlic and rosemary, of fresh paint and possibility. They'd made remarkable progress in just a few weeks. Walls painted in warm, welcoming colors. Original hardwood floors restored to glowing life. Furniture carefully chosen to honor the home's history while meeting their modern needs. It's beautiful, I told them, meaning it. You've done an incredible job. We couldn't have done it without you, Sophia said, hugging me. Your advice, your help painting, your moral support. That's what family does, I said simply. Richard approached, offering a tentative smile. Hello, Madeline. Richard. I nodded, surprised at the lack of tension I felt. Dinner was served in the dining room, where they'd preserved the wall of etched names, adding their own to the timeline. Daniel and Sophia Carter, 2025. The conversation flowed easily. About the house, about their plans, about the photography studio Sophia was establishing with the loan from Richard. As we lingered over dessert, Daniel raised his glass. A toast, he said, looking around the table at each of us. To second chances. To truth, however painful. And to family. The one we have, not the one we imagined. We clinked glasses, united in that moment by something stronger than the past that had divided us. Not forgetting, but moving forward. Not perfect, but real. Later, as Richard and I prepared to leave, Sophia pulled me aside. I wanted you to be the first to know, she whispered, her eyes shining. We're expecting. Early November. Joy bloomed in my chest, fierce and immediate. Oh, Sophia. We weren't planning it so soon, but... She shrugged, smiling. Life happens on its own schedule. Daniel's over the moon, and I'm nervous, but ready, I think. I hugged her tightly. You're going to be wonderful. Parents. On the porch, saying goodnight, Daniel drew me into a fierce embrace. I love you, Mom. Thank you for never giving up on me. On us. I never could, I told him, feeling the truth of it in my bones. That's not how love works. As Richard and I walked to our respective cars, the night wrapped around us, warm and full of promise. Grandparents, he said softly. Hard to believe. It goes quickly, I agreed. One day they're learning to walk, the next they're buying houses and having babies of their own. We reached my car first. Richard paused, his expression thoughtful. We did one thing right, didn't we? Despite everything, we raised a good man. I raised a good man, I corrected him, but without rancor. You contributed DNA and occasional weekend visits. He winced, then surprised me with a genuine laugh. Fair enough, but I'm trying to do better now. Yes, I acknowledged. You are. As I drove home through the quiet streets, I thought about the dinner at Maison Dorée that had set all this in motion. How Richard's calculated cruelty had inadvertently opened the door to honesty, to healing, to the reconstruction of a family fractured for too long. The chandelier. Light had shimmered above us that night, exposing every flaw, every lie, every hidden truth. But chandeliers don't just illuminate, they transform ordinary light into something extraordinary. Taking a single source and scattering it into countless points of brilliance, perhaps truth works the same way. Painful in its initial revelation, but ultimately creating something more beautiful than deception ever could. A light that doesn't just expose, but transforms. That shows us not only who we have been, but who we might become. As I pulled into my driveway, I felt a sense of completion, of circles closing and new ones beginning. The past couldn't be changed, but it could be understood, accepted, even forgiven. The future couldn't be controlled, but it could be faced with honesty and hope. And the present, this moment, this life, could be lived in the clear, transformative light of truth.